Hey guys, welcome back to Tennis 360, the podcast where we talk about all things tennis. My name's Anthony Hirsch.
I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
And welcome back to Tennis 360 podcast. So we had Alcaraz beating Medvedev in the final of Indian Wells this week. He gets his 7th big title, 5th Masters. He's back. Alcaraz is back. He goes back to back in Indian Wells. You were there at the final, Eliza. What was your perspective of watching the match?
Yeah, well, it's great to see him getting a first title now since his Wimbledon title. So a bit of a drought for him. And I think in his post-match press conference, he sort of talked a little bit about losing some of the enjoyment of tennis, having a little bit of kind of stress and anxiety around the pressure. So it was just super important to him coming into this tournament to have some fun and have a good 2 weeks. And that certainly looked like he was having fun on the court. I was able to watch his semifinal match against Sinner, which he played incredibly well, and then also his final against Medvedev. I think we saw some real strategic changes with Alcaraz, which is something that, a lot of the analysts have been calling for some time, wanting to see Alcaraz take more conscientious steps in his decision making and execution in how he rallies basically from the baseline, and not always looking to either have some sort of huge injection of pace or execute a drop shot on that second or third ball. He seemed much more willing to stay in the rally and look for better opportunities with higher percentages for him to execute. And in particular, in the Sinner match, I thought he did that very well. He gave Sinner, especially in that second and third set, a number of kind of heavy topspin rally balls that was really getting Sinner outside of his comfort zone, out of his strike zone, making it difficult for him to really unleash the power that we've been seeing off of Sinner's racket this year. And in the Medvedev match, he didn't get off to the best starts with 3-0 down, but once he was back in the mix, I mean, I felt like it was near perfect execution up until that final point. And he seemed to just kind of really start to get into the groove and was using his head to make better decisions. So I think evident that there's been progression and work done there off the court, which has been, essential for him to getting back to the top. And also great to see that ankle injury, which he picked up just a few weeks prior, didn't seem to be bothering him all that much, because there were question marks about that heading into this tournament as well.
Yeah, I agree. He played very button-down tennis throughout this tournament, absolutely, which is something that he's been so, I think, impulsive on so many balls recently, and just unloading on the forehand. And I agree. It felt like he never really got that. You never really saw him smile on the court and be happy and enjoy himself, which I think is so essential to the tennis he plays and the brand of tennis he plays. And I think that even though he wasn't going for crazy shots all the time, I think we left even more impressed with Alcaraz than we ever did in the past, of the last 8 months. And I think that's we came away more impressed than when he would just go for crazy shots and not have more middle ground on his play. And yeah, I think these are conditions that really, really suit him. Obviously, the serve, especially with how much kick he likes to do on that serve, the toss and serve, the high bouncing courts really help with that. And it helped a lot also that he was making a lot of serves in his matches against Medvedev. He made 76% of his first serves in, which helped a lot. And it's also just that in the first set against Arnaldi in his first match, it looked like he was in that style of tennis, but I think he really put his head down and compiled really good matches, a lot against players that he has losing head-to-heads against, because he beat Sinner has a 4-3 head-to-head against him, Zverev has a winning head-to-head against him, Morozov beat him in Rome last year, which is that crazy loss last year, and then also FA has a winning record against him 3-1. He beat all of these players, and even on the other ends of that was Arnaldi and Medvedev. Those are two tough players as well. We saw with Arnaldi. So it was very, very impressive, and I do think that the serve of Alcaraz in that final was a big thing, especially because Medvedev's serve is so neutralized on the surface as well. And here's a stat for you, is that Alcaraz had double the unreturned serves that Medvedev did. He went with 16 unreturned serves to 8 from Medvedev. In the U.S. Open match that they played last year, towards the end of last year, Medvedev hit 54 unreturned serves. In this match, it was 8. So that kind of shows you what was going on here. And Medvedev also won 85% of first serve points in that match. He was just 63, while Alcaraz was doing 75. So just a few stats throw out there just to kind of show under the scenes. But all of those numbers being said, Alcaraz served well. Medvedev couldn't do enough on the surface, which is much slower. And I feel like Alcaraz loves it. He loves time to set up his shots, even though he plays aggressive, kind of like a Sinner. Sometimes he can hit the hard forehands, but it's not just pace generation after pace generation. This really gave him the time to set up the points, and I felt like he had the patience to build out those points really well. So,
yeah, I agree. And I think overall it was a really important tournament for him to have a good run at, to, re-solidify himself as a part of the conversation of the top players. Not that he was out of the conversation, but people had question marks. And, since he's burst onto the scene, he's had, pretty much instant success with winning tournaments. So it felt like definitely uncharacteristic for him to be in this, period of drought. Questions over whether his health and fitness would be at the right level to compete as well as he did this tournament. So big props to him and his team for, making those changes and being willing to adjust his game and his strategy. And I think this tournament was also, shows that even if it's a slow, hard court, Medvedev is always a part of the conversation when it comes to hard court tennis. And he'll be disappointed in some of those numbers, in particular how it, affected his serve and his ability to really look for a +1. But, there's only so much you can do in certain conditions. And I think he showed that he was willing to try something new, change things up. Like, I think this time last year when we watched the final, like, he was standing all the way at the back. This time he was like, I'm willing to, try and come in a little earlier. And we saw some of those changes at the AO. So I think one can't really fault Medvedev in some ways. Like, he did his best against what is a really difficult opponent in these conditions for his style of play. And he definitely hung in there and stuck around and gave Alcaraz something to think about in that first set. And then very much like the women's final, that second set was a runaway train and he just lost control and Alcaraz took over. But I think Medvedev deserves a lot of credit for his performances so far this year and his willingness to also adjust his strategies and tactics. He's not a 21-year-old, he's a 27-year-old. And he's one of the few guys on tour at that age who's, shows willingness to do that. And I think that's why Medvedev will have longevity at the top of the game.
Yeah, I agree. Very different kind of conditions, but against Sinner at the Australian Open, the first 2 sets, he was just so aggressive, constantly coming to net. And I mean, sometimes it looked like a madman the way he's hitting the volleys. It's ridiculous. Yeah. But you're like, you can't help but to be a little bit impressed by it. Yeah. And I felt like the same thing here. He came out of the blocks really good. He was up a break on Alcaraz early, which was really good. And I think that, Alcaraz fought exceptionally well to get back into it. And, but I do think that he has the skill set to be able to try things out like that. And sometimes people can see him as kind of just, kind of weirdly at a 6'6" player, but kind of as a grinder, a rally ball kind of player. But he has a huge skill set even to be able to play the way he does, because he's not like a Gilles Simon kind of grind from the back kind of player. He has a very unique style of play, the way he's returning way back and hitting crazy passing shots, the dexterity he has, and moving forward into the court, hitting defense to offense. He has the skill set in order to play different ways, which is why we saw him adjust to surfaces like grass and clay last year. And then also Indian Wells last year as well, which was very impressive to see him defend the final, despite his serve really not working throughout, I think, the whole tournament, which was a bit wild. But yeah, I think props to Medvedev for switching things up. Alcaraz played unbelievable though throughout the match, and I think that's what we saw. That's what we saw unfold in this tournament. But yeah, great stuff. And that Sinner Alcaraz match of the semis was really good as well.
Yeah. Also, quick shout out to Tommy Paul. I think he had a very good run at this tournament. He's often the American that can go a little bit under the radar in terms of conversation, big names. And he's really had a solid 18 months now. Really been a contender when it comes to hard court tennis. Made the semifinal here, and my goodness, he really looked in a favorable position to beat Medvedev in that semifinal, and kind of had this unfortunate ankle roll when he was up a mini break in the tie break in that second set. If he had won that set, he would have won the match. And I felt like he just lost some focus and concentration. Was almost like when a boxer, takes a punch on a chin and sort of checks out for a little bit. It feels like that's kind of what happened to him, and something for him to improve on. But he took the racket out of Medvedev's hand that first set and played some really fantastic tennis. Again, demonstrated some willingness to switch things up. I wouldn't think of Tommy Paul as a traditional serve and volley type of player, and he was executing that really well against Medvedev in that first set and a half. So I definitely think as long as his ankle is in a good spot, that he will be a name that's in contention for the upcoming Masters in Miami.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the results before this tournament as well kind of speak for themselves with the Dallas title, then the Delray Beach Open final. He's been playing really good. And this is what we saw last year as well. He was like top 5 win rate on hard courts, which was really impressive too. So, I think, watch out for Paul. He's like underrated, right? Because his athleticism is constantly very impressive. And I feel like he doesn't get the right shout out because he's always under the shadow of players like Taylor Fritz and like Sebastian Corda. But I feel like he deserves the praise as well, because if he keeps these results up, he could maybe sneak a spot in the top 10 or a look at it at least. Yeah. So I think that's.
And we forget, didn't he win the junior French Open title? Like, he's not bad on clay. His senior results haven't been very evident of that, but. No, he certainly can do it.
He can do it. I don't know. We might have to wait a few years for him to build that up again. I don't know how that. I don't know how that happened, but I guess he can play on clay. I think he has potential on grass, to be honest. Yeah. I always thought he plays well on grass, but well, you heard here first. Roland Garros champion Tommy Paul. Let's see. And by the way, it reminds me of Swiatek won Wimbledon, so let's see as a junior. On the men's side, some other stuff that has kind of been going on. Lehechka beat, we mentioned last week, he beat Rublev. He also beat Tsitsipas in 2 sets. That was very impressive. And then what else kind of to talk about towards the end of this event? The Alcaraz and Sinner match was really good stuff from Alcaraz turning it around after losing a breadstick in the first set. Alcaraz just, started off poorly after the rain delay, had like 4 unforced errors in 1 game, and then lost it from there. And then he really managed to turn it around really, really well. Sinner was, I felt like the thing switched. Sinner hit 40 errors to just 25 of Alcaraz. And there was an injury for Sinner there in the third set, a couple of injuries actually, one with the dive and the wrist. And he had a few, so I don't know how big of an asterisk that is. But that being said, I think that Alcaraz, it was obvious he was playing absolutely amazing tennis, and he was playing the button-down tennis that we had seen for a while. And Sinner was struggling with the high balls on this court. He wasn't able to hit through Alcaraz, and initially that was the thing that I thought was the most important thing for Alcaraz. I felt like they really switched from the first set into the second and third sets what happened. And it was just superb shot making from Alcaraz in this tournament. I mean, it's cool to have top players, and it's cool to have top players that can hit like some of the greatest shots of all time every time you're watching their matches, because it makes it so exciting. You have a player like, I don't want to throw a name under the bus, but like an Alexander Bublik, who's a very exciting player, but he's not going to be a top 5 player like Alcaraz, for example. But then you have a player like Alcaraz who can hit those crazy shots while winning matches, and it makes a recipe for somebody that's going to bring a lot of ice to the sport, I think, for a long time. So, but yeah, and then on the women's side, we had Swiatek beating Maria Sakkari. She destroyed everybody in this tournament. I don't know another way to put it. It was crazy. She lost 21 games. Throughout the tournament, she only lost 5 points to Sakkari in the second set of the final. Swiatek, it just seems unbeatable, and she loves slow hard courts. It's crazy. She really likes the surface, and she just played she just played so well and so aggressive when she needed to too, and especially off that forehand. And Sakkari was saying the forehand great this week, but whenever it would go forehand to forehand, I felt confident that Swiatek was going to be winning those points. I think that's something that is probably underrated about Swiatek at this point. Her defense is obviously elite, but her offense is quite good as well. And it's so good to watch that, especially on a slow hard court where she has so much time to set up the points and turn points around and hit those winners from maybe she was in a defensive position earlier. But yeah, I mean, she's just sometimes she's playing and it just feels like she's unbeatable. And Sakkari certainly couldn't do it in that final.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm trying to separate kind of two things. There's one piece for me that Sakkari, every time I've seen her live, and then I look at her on TV, she has a lot of negative self-talk going on. There's a lot of, negativity that happens when she's facing challenging moments in a set. I remember watching her at Cancun last year. She was ripping her coach. She was just not engaged and willing to problem solve. And I feel like that's been her biggest barrier or hurdle to success. So I do think she took a right step in separating from her coach, looking for a new voice. I think that we saw some evidence of positive change this week from that coaching change. Having said that, though, these conditions are, again, suitable for her. She's made the final here twice before. So I don't necessarily think that this was like, oh my God, coaching change made a Masters 1000 final. Like,
yeah,
these, she's been here, done that at Indian Wells. I still saw a lot of the negative self-talk happening. It was a little bit more under control. She definitely demonstrated that during the Coco golf match, where she easily could have let it out of her grasp in the third set, went down an early break and managed to get it back and get a double break on Coco. She looked a little over-reliant on her team at times on, asking where to serve. And again, like this sort of like willingness to problem solve and fight challenges on her own in a positive and constructive way. I mean, it's much easier said than done, but I think that's Maria's biggest challenge. And so coming into this final, I just really wanted to see a fight and a level of competition of like, I am just going to do whatever it takes to stay in the mix here and compete. And, she went down 3-0 in the first set and I was like, oh boy, here we go. Then she kind of showed some resilience, got back to 3-3, did a really good job of holding serve until it came to 5-4. She needed to serve to stay in it and just had a shocker of a game. Like, really poor. I think there was a double fault in there, a lot of unforced errors, didn't control the controllables. And just, I felt like I saw it coming in that moment. And then at Masters 1000 tournaments, I think it's some sort of ridiculous stat that Iga Swiatek has of, 64 wins and 0 losses after she won the first set. So it was kind of like, all right, it's wrapped. It's all said and done. But having said that, really wanted to see her push and fight and still bring a high level in the second set. Yeah, having said all of that, though, in terms of the challenges that Sakkari has, when we look at how good Swiatek is and the fact that she dropped less than 3 games in every second set in each round of this tournament, one starts to look a little deeper beyond just, Sakkari not being able to show up in big moments or having these types of things happen. And I think, and I'm curious what your answer is, but I think Swiatek's movement and defense and ability to turn D into O in such a seamless and smooth way is so effective, and it causes the opponent to be like, what do I do? Like to win a point. And you start to think like, it's impossible for me to win a point. It's almost like a Djokovic type aura of difficulty and challenge. Having said that, though, there are patterns of play that we know upset Swiatek. There are skill sets that I think can bother her on these types of surfaces. I saw her miss a number of approach balls or just kind of like weird slice shots that she didn't really like. I don't think Sakkari really leaned into getting a drop shot or trying to bring her into the net or kind of using some more acute angles. I also feel like with Swiatek, if you continue to hit side to side, she's in a happy place. She likes to move. She's a great mover. She's happy with that. I wanted to see Sakkari really try to peg Swiatek wide on one side and then look to drive down the line, look to use the drop shot, look to come into net. I just think Sakkari literally played into what Swiatek likes, which is a hard, heavy ball and moving her around the court. And she's like, yeah, I could do this all day. Like, this for me is a piece of cake. And that's the one bit with Sakkari where I'm like, yeah, the odds were kind of stacked against you. And if you lose a second set in a final as a bagel, may as well try some different stuff tactically, especially in those last few games. And her unwillingness to do that is what disappointed me.
Yeah, that's fair. She was really content in going on those forehand rallies and just rallying it out, like you said.
Yeah.
So yeah, I absolutely agree. She should have tried things out. I think it's the aggressive and very kind of fearless style that like a Rybakina or an Ostapenko face that can really give trouble to Swiatek, really put her under some kind of pressure. Now, when you're in the middle of a match situation, and maybe I'm not sure that Sakkari is used to showing those skills on court, but that being said, she should have tried it. But it is difficult to put those out, especially when you're in that final playing Swiatek. I'm sure mental baggage from 2 years ago. All that said, I agree with you. She played right into Swiatek's hand, and I'm always in the favor of like, just go for it. Like, if you're gonna lose to Swiatek anyway, just go for it. You never know what might happen.
In love. Like especially those last two service games, whether you lose 6-0 or 6-1, who cares at that point? Yeah. Like, you really may as well try to show some different stuff, try to bother her a little bit. And I don't necessarily think it's just a problem that Sakkari has against Swiatek. I think that's just like the Sakkari problem, is she just likes to hit big from the baseline. It's the way that she trains. It's the way that she approaches her tennis. And of course, it's effective against, the majority of the field. But when you look at the variety that the top 10 possesses and their ability to defend, especially Iga Swiatek on a slow, hard court, I think it's really naive tactically to think that you can hit through her. And I don't get like what her and her team's tactic really was in approaching this match, because you've played Swiatek enough times. You've played her in the finals before. And the praise that I was giving Medvedev of like, the guy clearly tried something different. It didn't work out for him, but he did something else to try to win that match. I respect that so much. Sakkari to me did nothing different in this match than she did 2 years ago. And it's that like old saying of like, you continue to try the same thing and it goes wrong. Like, what do you expect? And that's something that I really think her team like need to look at and address. And if she doesn't have that skill set, then, which I doubt, I'm sure she has some level of ability to execute that. It's just a confidence thing and a mental thing with Maria. And they need to work on it.
All right, and now for the power ranking segment of the podcast, where we talk about which players we think are doing the best at the moment. So following Indian Wells, I have Alcaraz at number 1. You have Alcaraz at number 1 as well. I think some people might still have Sinner at number 1, but I decided to put Alcaraz there because, man, when he's playing well, he is playing great. Like, his peak is so high. I'd put it up there with one of the higher peaks I think we've seen. And I'm not necessarily saying it's already with the likes of Rafa Roger, but I am saying that when he's playing his absolute best, the complete style of game that he brings, the winners from every position on the court, to me, he's already has one of the higher peaks that I've seen, and we saw it this week, and it already made me so excited about him. And also beating Jannik, for me, he right now is the top guy to beat.
I agree. I think there's certainly an argument for Sinner still sticking in that number 1 spot. And as we talk more about Miami coming up, I think it's important to note the quite stark differences in conditions between Indian Wells and Miami. Certainly these types of conditions do favor Alcaraz. The ball bounces up so much higher. That's just due to the surface at Indian Wells, the hot and cold conditions, windy conditions that they dealt with all week. And whereas in Miami, there's just heavy humidity, much higher heat. And I think we think back to Miami semifinal last year where Sinner got the better of Alcaraz and what type of slog and match that was. So I do think Sinner could be slightly favorable position for Miami itself. But I mean, given that these are, kind of the current power rankings and how everybody played this week, I was certainly impressed by Alcaraz's performance and worthy of the number one spot for this week. Maybe that conversation will change next week.
Yep, I agree. Alcaraz this week was just so good. But then Medvedev at number 3. We both have Zverev at number 4 as well. Paul at number 5. Pretty similar. And then you have Rune a spot ahead of de Minaur, but those were 2 of the best performers this week. Then Ruud, who had a very good run to the quarterfinals. He hasn't picked up a title on this hardcourt season, but he's also played pretty well. Never enough, I think, to beat some of the top players. I think that's a pattern for him in general anyway, but he's been performing well, and it's way better than he did in the 2023 season, which I think is exciting with Casper. And then I added Monfils because he bageled Hurkacz, and then itself is impressive. Yeah. So that's why. And Lehechka is at number 10. What do you have at your bottom 5?
Yeah, pretty similar. I think Rune finally showed up this week, played some good tennis again. Had a good show of it. De Minaur, tough match against Zverev, but Zverev, I think, executed very well in that second and third set, and De Minaur went away a little bit. I've been playing a lot of tennis, so don't blame him if there was a little lactic in the legs. Casper Ruud, I agree with you. I mean, I think he's just been having a really good hard court season this year by his standards, especially in comparison to last year. I've been impressed with his movement. His all-around kind of concentration and execution has been strong. So good to kind of see him just, plugging away and doing the best that he can. And he'll be excited to get on the clay very soon. Taylor Fritz, I think he should have done better against Holger Rune in Indian Wells. He had match points. I really think he was in a good position to close out that match. And he let Rune rally and kind of, just start to hit him with some super aggressive shots. And kind of just, I felt like he mentally faded a little bit and really shouldn't have let Rune back in that way because he was in a commanding position to win that match. So he falls to number 9 for me, but I certainly think he'll still be a name that's in conversation in Miami. He seems to play really well in the heat, even though that's not something like typical of American players. He won the Del Rey title. He's competes, decently well in these conditions. So in front of an American crowd, I think he could still have a good little run. And Ben Shelton stays in my number 10 spot. He's a Florida Gator alumni. That's why I think he's going to rally this week. He has a little bit of a tough draw. He is likely to kind of face some big guns earlier on, but I think he's going to have a big fan base turnout for him. And we all know that he performs in those types of environments when the crowd's really involved. And I think he's certainly going to command that. So anybody who sees him in their half of the draw this week, I think isn't going to be best pleased about it. So as long as he takes care of business in round 1 and round 2, he'll be worthy of that number 10 spot, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah, that should be an interesting 4th round, Shelton versus Sinner there. Shelton, as long as he shows a good game in that match, doesn't mean if he wins or not, and with the crowd riling him up. Yeah, it could be good. I was sad to have Taylor fall out of my top 10, but it was because that match points holding that I was just like not as excited. Like Rune, I was like, yeah, he's back in, and he had a couple good weeks on hard courts anyway, kind of similar to Casper. Yeah. And that's why he got in. And I thought he was hitting his forehand fantastic this week. It was just a couple of moments of like bad shot selection and poor game. Like we keep seeing flashes of brilliance from Holger. And he plays such a complete game, even though maybe it's not as flashy as an Alcaraz per se. But we see flashes of brilliance, so much variety from the back of the court, and being able to step in and play aggressive, but also great speed, especially speed moving up and down the court, I think, is very, very good from Holger. So there's a lot of ways that I'm really excited about Rune. But I just think that there were a couple moments that I think if he works on not having a couple moments where he drops down his level and drops down his shot selection, then I think he's going to be able to rise up, and he should already be a top 4, top 5 guy consistently. But it's just those moments of immaturity that I think are losing him matches. And even his mentality in fighting back in matches is quite good, which has let him, despite that, win some. But I think he needs to kind of improve on that. That's why I think he was losing this week. But yeah, I mean, Fritz, still, he did enough against Taylor, and Taylor, I agree. I think mentally he had a drop off there. It didn't even look like he was giving as much intensity as usual towards the end of that match. And that was unfortunate to see, where Fritz has done just so well over the last, like, not just in 2022, but the last 3 years in general, as well. So yeah, anyway, wasn't great to see that from Fritz. He dropped out, but yeah. And then on the WTA side, for the power rankings, Swiatek, then Sabalenka, then Goff. I had Navarro come in. It wasn't just this week. She's been playing phenomenal, but I mean, this week, just so impressive to beat Sabalenka, a run to the semifinals. Yeah, she's just been so utterly impressive in just nearly every aspect of the game. And she has such a, like, quiet personality on her on-court, I feel like sometimes. That's very kind of locked in, but I just love it. She shows up with a racket. And then Kostyuk, Rybakina. Then I have Sakkari, who jumped in. Potapova jumped in at number 10. Pavlyuchenkova. Pavlyuchenkova had a pretty good win over Kalinskaya once again, and got to the fourth round, so she stays in just because of that 1,000 victory. But yeah, and it's good to see Sakkari back. If she has another good win, I'd love to see her in the top 5. But yeah, good to see Sakkari back in 1,000 wins. And despite everything we said about Maria, I mean, still a very good run. That win against Goff was very impressive, with Goff just never, ever giving up. And we saw that earlier in the first round versus Burrell. We see that now. And we saw that in this match. Goff really wasn't showing up with a very good level. Then out of nowhere, just started playing top tier, and they were having exquisite rallies. And Sakkari just stayed determined and ran away within the third, which was really impressive mentally. And it was impressive the way she served and was serving all week, and that helped her through a lot of matches as well. So yeah, I think that kind of aggression without being overly aggressive is what we've come to see from Sakkari, and she was playing really well up until the final, where Swiatek is just so hard to beat and figure out a ways to beat her.
Yeah, and I have very similar names in here. I think I've got Wozniacki and Yuan in here over Paolini and Pavlyuchenkova. There's definitely a shout that Paolini should be in my power rankings. So I'm not opposed to that choice whatsoever. I think Wozniacki had a good run of things at Indian Wells, and she has a decent draw in Miami coming up as well. And I just think with her level of fitness, she can bother players who might not be on their absolute A game for whatever reason. She's got, the freshness in her legs that some of the players who've run a little deeper in the previous tournaments might not have, or the kind of mental freshness. And so she can really just be such a pain in the ass to play because she just is getting every single ball back and moves so well. It's like, she doesn't seem really to have lost a step since having 2 kids. So
yeah, I was going to say doing that since like 2007 or whatever. So
I mean, she's a nightmare. She would be the type of player, if I played her, I would just I would have a mental breakdown. You're just like, how? Yeah. Potapova made it into my list as well. I think she had a good fight back performance against was it Kostyuk in the end, and had some good.
Yeah, she beat Paolini as well.
Paolini, yeah, she's a quiet kind of sleeper on the tour in terms of some tournaments she really wants to show up and play, and other tournaments she doesn't really seem all that bothered. And that's something I've been learning as I've gotten a little tighter in on the tennis tour, that motivations certainly dwindle at times for players. They're normal human beings. Some weeks are more motivated than others, and it's just kind of normal. But I think she's done well a little previously in Miami, and I think she likes the heat. So, I would expect to see a decent few results from her, unless she's, all of a sudden wakes up on the wrong side of the bed. And Yuan is a Chinese player, a young Chinese player that I think wasn't on the radar of many of us coming into this tournament, but she's had a silently good year, good stacking up of results. And I think when we chatted last week, I was like, I've never watched her play. So I decided to watch her play, and she is a small, slight frame. You would not expect this girl to hit a big ball kind of reminds me of like a Sinner type of like, oh, this guy's like not gonna hit it that hard. Yeah, she rips a forehand, and it is surprising. And I think she showed great resilience to beat Kazakina, who again is one of those defensive players that could really throw off a young player like her. So I was impressed by her run.
Yeah, I like that shout out too.
Excuse me.
Oh, bless you. But yeah, that's our power rankings for this week. We've got a big upcoming to talk about. It's not really upcoming. It started like 6 or 7 hours ago. But in Miami, the second leg of the Sunshine Double, from Tennis Paradise to, I don't know, Tennis Heaven. I don't know. Is that a good branding? Does it make any sense at all? But anyway, we got another 1,000, and yeah, it's going to be good. We've got a lot of players playing it, like a lot of top players going at it. And there's a lot of great first rounds as well. On the ATP side, we've got Murray versus Berrettini. We've got Feast versus Arnaldi. Sonego versus Evans. Those are some really good ones. On the women's side is some very good ones. Stearns versus Azarenka jumps out to me. Stearns just playing an incredible match against Sabalenka, holding 4 match points. So Azarenka's dealt with a few bad losses recently, and that could be an interesting one. But I also like Azarenka in Miami, so we'll see if experience wins out or if Stearns just insane, like just ball bashing will win out, because
I was at that match with Sabalenka, and I've also watched Peyton Stearns play at the US Open last year against Jabeur, and I think Peyton is reliably difficult to play on US soil. And again, another one of those college ball players that loves to whip up a competitive atmosphere, get the crowd involved, have that type of energy. Of course, she went to Texas, so not quite the relationship that Ben might have with the crowd, but I do think a US crowd's going to get behind a US backed player, and the way that Stearns interacts with them is just going to, cause an awesome atmosphere. And on top of that, I said this last week, but she's a really respectful fighter in the way that she goes about it. And she's a lot of fun to watch. So if you guys get the opportunity to tune into that one, that's going to be a second round match that I think is definitely worth the popcorn.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, she's like straight out of college. I remember like a year ago, or maybe like a year and a half ago, watching her on one of the local TV stations, her playing college tennis in one of the big college tournaments, and the crowd just going insane. I was like, man, that girl is good. Like, she's good. Like, she could really get to the top of pros. Similar thing happened with, was it Schneider? But it's really cool to watch college tennis and see these players come up. I think it's a great way to do things, is to come through college. And yeah, I mean, she's crazy, and she hits the ball so hard. We saw versus Sabalenka, but also she's just got so many shots to hit, which is very impressive. Sigmund versus Ostapenko. Sorry, go ahead. Sigmund versus Ostapenko. That's going to be an interesting match there.
See who the crowd likes more.
Yeah, 2 personalities that are
super
pretty
annoying.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and then Vekic versus Pliskova, and Stevens versus Kerber is quite good as well. 2 Grand Slam champions there. Don't know if they'll be at their best, but they've both been in decent form recently, to be honest. I mean, Kerber in her comeback, probably the best she's been, so that's going to be good. Just getting to the round of 16 against Wozniacki, I think, last week. So, yeah, those are going to be some good first rounds. And then we had our picks to win. They're exactly the same, but
Anthony copied me.
No. This is a rewriting of history. Swiatek, and then also Sinner winning the titles there. Those are our picks. We'll see what happens. Sinner looking for revenge. Do you also think it will be an Alcaraz Sinner final? Because that's what I'm expecting. Absolutely.
Yeah, now that the draw is out and it looks like it could shake up that way, then yes. Also, Djokovic isn't in the mix. For those of you who didn't get the memo, he pulled out for not injury reasons, but personal scheduling reasons. Interesting. But I think Sinner has a tougher draw. Tommy Paul's in his half. Medvedev is in his half. So I do think he has some more challenging moments to come through in this tournament, Alcaraz will breathe a sigh of relief that Djokovic isn't competing in this tournament. He hasn't in a couple of years now, but I could see that being a situation where Sinner doesn't make it through, but I'm still riding the Sinner wave at the moment, feeling pretty confident about his performances. And I do think these humid, hot, heavy conditions are similar to how they were playing in Australia. And so I would suspect that he might be able to refine that form. As long as those injuries that he sort of looked like he had at Indian Wells don't creep back into the question or conversation, then I would expect a Sinner Alcaraz final, which would make tennis fans so unbelievably happy.
Yeah.
I wish I wasn't moving apartments next weekend, because I would be flying back to Miami instantly.
Oh yeah, that would be crazy. Yeah, tied up at 4-4. Yeah, we only hope for that for sure. Rematch of last year. Yeah, I think the courts really do favor Sinner as well. Very low bounce. And listen, Sinner's played the Miami Open 3 years. The first time that he played it, he got to the final. Second year, he retired in the first set against Cerundolo. Basically, didn't really play the match. It was like 4-1 the first set. Could barely move. It was not pretty. I was a chance also, I think, against Francisco Cerundolo to get to at least the semis, and then the next year he gets to the final again, loses to Medvedev last year. Obviously, he loves these courts. He's got like a crazy, like, I don't know exactly what, but like 85 plus win rate at this tournament. Which is really, really impressive. And I expect Sinner to find it again. Also, he'll be ultra motivated, because I think the thing that people don't understand is, like, they ask, like, are these guys motivated by the other young guy doing better? And the answer is yes. Like, obviously, that's what you're just saying about motivation of players. Like, obviously, like, Sinner sees Alcaraz doing better. That's gonna make him. Tennis it's only you out there. Your like absolute motivation and mental fortitude is what keeps you going when the sport is so revolving around those tight moments and around just putting a little bit more when it's so a fine margin. Even not on break point, but just, I love in a game where I love throwing it, just putting that a little bit more into every single point. Like, I want to beat you because you just beat Djokovic in the Wimbledon final. It's like that little bit more puts them over the line. And I think that people don't really get that. So,
well, especially when you're talking about players who are genuinely in contention for the final. Your top 5 players, the ones who we're really talking about with potential to win this tournament, I think motivation there is, it gets to a certain age where the Djokovic conversation might be like, how easy it to sustain it after you've done it for 15, 20 years. That's a different conversation. But at this age where Sinner and Alcaraz are at, they both have Grand Slams. They both have Masters titles. They both are a similar age and they're good friends. Sure, their relationship is certainly motivating and helps them get out there and compete. When we talk about players that are ranked between like 20 and 40, or even, about that mark, where they're really coming in with a super outside chance week in, week out to win these tournaments. We're talking about players that pretty much every week are going to lose at some point, whether it's round 2, round 3, round 4, they're going to lose. So I do think, like with tennis, it comes to a point where just at some moments in the schedule, you don't really fancy the tournament. You don't really like the hotel you're in. You don't really fancy the draw or whatever it is. Or, you wake up one day and something's a little bit sore. Yeah. I'm starting to realize that, like, it's hard. It's hard to week in, week out, give your best performance, have your best focus, have your best everything, when you're not even talking about competing for the title. You're talking about competing to get to a 3rd or 4th round. And of course, the motivation is there for the most part, but it's understandable why it may dwindle at some tournaments more than others, depending on what conditions players like. And so, it's a hard sport in that way.
That's such a good point, though, because it's a losing game a lot of the time. You wake up and you know that, like exactly what you said, whether it's tomorrow or the day after, you're gonna feel shitty on the court. You're like, God damn it, I should have got that forehand and got it over the net. I should have got that extra serve in. You're gonna have that moment, and like, God damn, I wouldn't want to live like that, or at least it would be tough. Like,
or even then it's like not even on you sometimes. Like, you're like, this person is just better than me. Like,
Yeah.
I practice just as much as them. I do everything that they do. And that's the tough life of professional sport, where no matter what you do, sometimes someone is just going to be better than you. And that's why the ranking systems are the way that they are. And I think sometimes, as you know, recreational tennis players or players, when we watch tennis and we're not like, you know, at these tournaments, like really talking to players or like looking, you know, kind of how they go about their day to day, it's easy to forget that, like, you know, I saw a story about Storm Hunter, who like won the, you know, got to the doubles final at Indian Wells, finished at like noon, had to get on a flight at 3 p.m., missed the connection to Miami, slept in the airport for 5 hours, gets to Miami, doesn't have her bags, is like waiting around in the airport, and then has to play her qualifying match that same day in the afternoon. And good on her, she won it. But fucking hell, like, do you know how many regular people complain about, oh, I had a shitty night's sleep and I slept 4 hours and I don't feel like it today? Well, imagine having to do that after you just like had a full week of competing. Maybe you stayed at a hotel you didn't really like, or you didn't get access to the food you didn't really want. And, you know, it's just like, there are so many things that we don't necessarily think about when it comes to tennis when we're just consuming it on the TV. And you just think, geez, like these guys are flying around the world and they get an amazing life and they get paid all this money. When the reality is that people outside the top 20 don't live this always amazing, fruitful life. Sure, at moments, the Grand Slams, all these types of times, awesome, amazing. But the in-betweens are super tough. And I think having some perspective on that that it's just reality of human beings and life can make some of these results and upsets and things that can happen in tennis much more understandable.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting part about it too for tennis, because it really brings out like the most human element of us in sport, of us having to you know, be at our very best in every facet, I think, in order to win matches. I think that makes it super interesting. I think that's why we need things that bring out the personalities. I love the like content that the ATP has had on their channel recently of like talking to players and like these funny, interesting videos, because it lets people in on their personalities, which I think is very cool and very interesting. And it seems like a trivial thing, but I think it's something that helps out the sport the more we can go in that direction, because it is so human and it is so personal and so interesting. And I mean, I know when I play tennis, I mean, this sport it's emotional as fuck. I mean, that's what it gets out of you. You're having conversations with you on court. You don't know what you're doing. You're just trying to get the ball on court. It's like you're losing your mind. But it's rewarding and we love it and it's great. But
it's brutal.
It's brutal. Yeah, it's brutal.
It's really brutal.
It's really brutal.
And to talk a little bit about the women's side, and both of us have picked Swiatek to have the Sunshine double successfully. Would that be her first time with the Sunshine double?
Second time after 22.
Yeah, so I think she's going to be feeling pretty good about her chances. We won't get into the depths of exactly what's going on, but Sabalenka is facing some personal issues. If you go on Twitter, I'm sure you will find it. So some question marks there over really, you know, what her performances are realistically going to be like. Cut her some slack and show her some love on social media. But I just think Swiatek is in a winning mood again, has started this year really well, other than kind of, you know, a difficult result at the AO. I think she's totally been on a tear, been difficult to beat, hard courts, these types of conditions. She's fantastic in. She's one of the fittest, most conditioned players as well. I think her draw looks reasonable. The other name that's back in the mix here is Rybakina. She is hopefully healthy to compete and has hopefully can have a good run. That's what tennis fans are hoping for. But Swiatek is certainly looking like the player that's in form to have a good run here in Miami. And I can't really think of many names that are going to stand in her way, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Swiatek, we said it already. She loves a slow hardcore. Miami plays quicker, obviously, with, like you said, with humidity. But Swiatek on a slow hard court is just different. So, yeah, I think Iga's going to be too hard to beat. And we'll see who's able to challenge her. I do hope that Rybakina is healthy and not dealing with other illness or whatever. If she's healthy, she could be tough. She got to the final last year, lost to Kvitova. But yeah, let's see what happens. I just think Iga's too tough. I agree with you. And and then that's the Miami. We're gonna talk more about stuff that happens with that. I'm hoping for Sinner Alcaraz. I'm sure you would be hoping for it too. By the way, can I? What was it like watching a Sinner Alcaraz match in person? I'm sure a lot of people would be wondering. They haven't had that experience. That awesome experience.
It was awesome. It did surprise me a little bit. The crowd was very much pro Alcaraz. So I think in this part of the country, in California, Southern California, there are a lot of Southern Americans who are here, a lot of Spanish support. So the crowd support for Alcaraz was noticeable, which surprised me a little bit. I thought that, from a neutral kind of tennis fans perspective, I really like watching both of them. I thought that there may be a little bit it would be a little bit more even. It also didn't help the fact that the guy who was sitting right behind me had a mouth that was like a megaphone, and it was absurd in terms of his cheering. Jeez. But yeah, to appreciate their athleticism in person, it was truly fantastic. I don't think it was their best match that I've seen from them, given the scoreline and kind of what happened, especially in that third set. I was kind of hoping for that to be much tighter than it was at the end of the day. And as you say, maybe some injuries in play. But, they both had moments of brilliance, some fantastic highlights and points in there that I can still remember and think of off the top of my head. So anybody who gets a chance, do it. Never say no. Go for it. I don't care if you lose sleep for a night. It's worth watching them play. And, I couldn't recommend it more.
Yeah, and to Carlos and Yannick, please play a match every single week. We would greatly appreciate it as well. And then for culture, we've got a few things to talk about. Pickleball, I don't know why it's being added to the Miami Open. I don't know why that we're connecting tennis and pickleball. It's first, if we're trying to get as many eyes on tennis, I don't know why we're adding pickleball into the mix as well. But basically, so there's going to be different celebrities playing pickleball, different players. There's also going to be a 2-day tournament with 16 of the world's best players. This is new. It's the first tennis event to ever have it. When James Blake announced this new thing, he said, we're excited to host elite wheelchair tennis and elite pickleball athletes. And so excited about wheelchair tennis. I think that's a form of tennis that absolutely deserves more eyes. They are very impressive, skillful athletes. I don't understand why it's just at the slams. I love that addition. I think that's great. But pickleball is not tennis. This is a completely different sport. And you don't get pretty much any of the same things you get from high-level tennis that you get in high-level pickleball. It's not as impressive of a sport. It just isn't. Athletically, physically, it's just not. And pickleball, you can exist in your own right, but it has to be just that. It has to exist in its own different faction, because it's kind of pegging tennis behind a little bit once we're starting to connect the two, I think, especially with the taking of courts. I don't like this change at all.
I disapprove. Yeah. I hope they put the pickleball courts far away in the corner, because if I watch the tennis and hear the doinkers in the background, I am going to be pissed off. And I hope the players are like, what the F is this? This is distracting. Get this away. And if you attend Miami and somehow come across it, just, give them some evil stares, shout a couple boos, some jizz here and there. You make them feel unwelcome, because they are unwelcome. No, I mean, I think it's just like pickleball and tennis from a societal, cultural standpoint, for the most part, are warring parties. And we know that there's very few people that are playing pickle and tennis. You might entertain as a tennis player playing some pickle with your non-coordinated friends who don't know how to play tennis, because it's too difficult to teach them how to play tennis. You want to do a social activity, pickleball is fine. I totally understand it for those types of purposes and environments. I think that this is a really awful collaboration. It's going to piss people off. I don't think the pickleball fans want anything to do with the tennis fans, and the tennis fans really don't want anything to do with the pickleball fans and the pickleball players. And I mean, I've tried to give it a go. I've tried to watch it. It's just not entertaining for me. You can hit the crap out of the ball and it goes nowhere. I hate the sound of it. Doubles is particularly boring. I have no interest in watching a 100-shot rally. I listened to at Indian Wells, they had I forget her name, but the #1 pickleball player. And she was like, yeah, I turned pro when I was 12. And I don't want to throw shade at loads of people, but I was like, yeah, you turned pro when you were 12 because like nobody fucking plays pickleball, bro. Like, that's why. Like, also question marks for your parents. Like, who's turning pro at 12? But yeah, I just think it's one of those things that seems a little bit tone deaf. Is kind of like whatever happy-go-lucky guy in the boardroom. He's like, yeah, we love pickleball. Like, let's just have them all together. And it's like, dude. This is going to send Twitter into a spiral if we can hear pickleball in the background. And we'll see if they get invited back next year. I sure hope not.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was going to say, you said they're 12. Are they 12 now? How long has pickleball
No,
been
she's like
around?
17 now.
Okay, I was just like, pickleball just started. I don't
exactly.
get it
That's why I was like, what do you mean you turned pro when you were 12? Like, we just started talking about pickleball like last year. Yeah. Like, you also, mean like...
The name is ridiculous as well. I'm sorry. If we want to have an elite sport, it shouldn't be called pickleball. But...
Well, it's named after the founder's dog, who was called Pickle. That's why it's called pickleball.
Well, that's a correlation that you could only find out if you read that online. Like that doesn't.
Or if you happen to have to sit with pickleball players at a tennis tournament, which is what happened to me, and I was like, I hate this.
Yeah, I don't care.
Even Martina Navratilova was like, you will not catch me watching any pickleball in Miami. And I was like, thank you for saying that. And everybody else should be saying that too. Like, ostracize them and put them in the back.
Yeah, tennis and pickleball should not be connected at a tournament. It doesn't even make any sense. And let's keep that away as much as possible.
But very much a big fan of the wheelchair tennis. I do think wheelchair and adaptive sports should get more opportunity to compete alongside able-bodied athletes. I think that the more we have the stages come together, the more opportunity there is for people to play tennis. I remember when I started out as a ball girl at Wimbledon, when you're 13, 14 years old, you want to stand on center court with Roger Federer or whatever. And there always used to be a thing of like, oh, we have the wheelchair like match, like, ugh. But then I actually ball girled for it and stood there for it. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is dope. This is tennis. This is really cool. It's a really high level. These are real high level athletes. And I think opening our minds to adaptive sports and trying to give them a stage that isn't always separate from able-bodied sports is super important. I mean, even the other week I was watching on social media, like this woman who's a pro skier who skis with one leg, like going down one of the like Olympic
it's crazy
ski slopes. And you're just like, how the heck do you do that? And I think it gives you an appreciation for, what you have and, and just an appreciation for these people as athletes, as competitors, their willingness to come out. It's really inspiring. It sounds cheesy, but if you're in Miami and you're at the tournament, please give them some love. Please show up. Please watch some of those matches. I think it's really important for the sport and for kids across the world who do have disabilities to see that there's opportunities for them to compete. And we know that sport is something that can, provide confidence, provide community, provide so many opportunities for people. And I'm really excited to see that they're the first Masters tournament that's supporting this. And I hope that continues.
Yeah, I agree. And it lets people who are disabled have faith in what they can do and see what can be done, and that they can go very far. And also it just speaks to the heart of what sport is, which is overcoming difficulties and getting better, and it's so impressive what they do. All that, like I love watching wheelchair tennis at the slams, and I just think they're super impressive athletes to be able to do the things that they do. And I think that's what we see in sport, and it's so good to see them have another avenue to show that, because I really think it's a great watch, and I think it's important to have it too.
Absolutely. Last thing to note on the culture front, guys, you may have noticed the Public Investment Fund, otherwise known as PIF, which is Saudi's investment arm into sports, has entered the party. They were a part of the Indian Wells BNP Paribas Open. They have taken over the ATP ranking system, so it's now the PIF ATP rankings. So you may have noticed that change. They will be sponsoring Miami, so they will be on the billboards there, and they will be in Madrid as well. We can have a separate podcast and a separate conversation on PIF and their investment in the sport in general and kind of what their plans are. I got the chance to meet a number of the folks that are involved in PIF, have a chat with them on, what's to come and what they are looking to spend their dollars on. But the high level line is that they're willing to invest somewhere between $2 to $3 billion, which is certainly a conversation starter for the sport of tennis. There's something not to be ignored, and hopefully start a conversation around, where tennis has the opportunity to improve, where the sport needs investment, and where there's opportunity for growth. So they have certainly come to play. Money talks. We know that. We've seen that in other sports. The one kind of top liner I'll leave here is that I do think they are approaching tennis in a different dynamic, in a different way than they did with golf. I don't foresee this being an issue where PIF is trying to create a live golf type of situation with a separated tour and players recruited to compete away from the ATP or ITF tours. I don't think that that's what's coming. The PIF has come in already looking for collaboration conversations around mergers, conversations around how they can really invest and grow the sport through specific avenues and channels. So more to come on that as the PIF looks to nail down a deal with the ATP, WTA, and ITF. We know that the big heads from the Grand Slams were at the BNP Paribas Open, and they will be in Miami as well. They didn't come to any sort of agreement in Indian Wells. They'll probably, try again in the next round of negotiations in Miami. And if nothing comes of that, probably look to nail something down in Madrid. So we don't have details just yet, but be aware that those changes are in the background, in the waiting room, and we'll be keeping a keen eye on it to see how these developments unfold over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's something to keep an eye on. I think that'll do it for this week on Tennis 360. I've been Anthony Hirsch.
I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, all of that stuff. We'll see you guys at the next one.
Bye.